Welcome, everyone, to the NANP. I'm Dr. Stephen Lindner, and today's topic is glyphosate as it relates to disease of our culture, and should we prevent, treat, or focus on optimizing health? So, I'm from the University of Bridgeport, where I am the Assistant Director for Online Learning for the Master's Program in Nutrition. And I'm also an Associate Professor there where I teach several courses such as Anatomy and Physiology, Pathophysiology, Vitamins and Minerals, and what makes our Master's Program very separate and distinct from other programs out there, the virtual clinic. It's the first online virtual clinic that exists, and it's a course that's really designed to instill confidence in the future nutritionist. And we want to make sure that all of our graduates are properly equipped with the tools and the skills needed to run a successful nutritional practice. And the online virtual clinic is designed to make our students very confident in the skills of doing the anthropometric measurements, being able to take blood pressure, doing bioelectric impedance analysis, waist hip ratios, looking at labs, interpreting labs, having a discussion with your client about it, doing a comprehensive head to toe nutritional physical exam, and having motivational interviews with your clients. And there are many master programs out there in the field of nutrition, but none that have um, a clinical experience. So, in any manner, that's a little bit about me. I am also a doctor of chiropractic for the last 23 years. I have my master's as well in nutrition, as well as my CNS. Students that do our master's program also get 255 hours by doing the virtual clinic towards the 1,000 hours needed for the clinical experience. So, moving on to today's topic, it's a pretty hot topic. It's very relevant in today's culture. And it's because we've seen so much in the news lately about glyphosate toxicity and people getting very ill and developing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and some major settlements that have taken place as a result. So, in terms of being proactive or being reactive, not just with glyphosate, but with any type of condition in general, and it's a philosophical concept to think about. So, there are very few patients that I've had that have come to me in 23 years that have said, Dr. Lindner, I feel great. Not only do I feel great, but I'm functioning in a fantastic way. But what can you do to help optimize my human performance? It just doesn't really happen. Usually people start out over here in the reactive phase. They usually start out here in the reactive phase, and after we help them improve and get better, then we can educate them and say, okay, now it's time to be proactive to avoid relapses, right? So there's also a point in time where you can actually go in both directions in terms of saying, well, someone, let's say, needed some sort of let's say they needed a cholesterol medication, right? So they're being reactive. But at the same point in time, there are certain drug induced nutrient depletions that we can help them with, and that's being proactive. All right, so there are times for both, but living proactively, right? I would make sure that my car has gasoline in it. I don't want to run out and be on E and then have to be reactive. Okay, so um, proactive and reactive certainly have their time and place, but the reality is many people start out here in the reactive phase, and through our job, through education, the whole idea is to get them to start functioning over here in the proactive model. Now, in terms of, in our title, do we treat disease or do we prevent disease or do we promote optimal health and wellness? Well, again, there's a time and a place to treat diseases. This is what I refer to as crisis care intervention. If someone breaks an arm or breaks a leg, they need crisis care intervention. They need that issue treated. If someone has 200 over 100 blood pressure, that's a crisis care situation. We don't want them stroking out or having a heart attack, so they need to receive crisis care intervention, get on some sort of medication so that they don't have a stroke or heart attack. Preventing disease is a whole different concept. If we talk about the law of attraction, this law of attraction works in a way where you don't want to attract something you don't want, right? So in terms of preventing disease, do we take care of people and do we eat a certain way because we don't want to get cancer? Because we don't want to have a stroke. We don't want to get heart disease, right? So I personally don't want to prevent anything. And I think it's kind of hard to have a business and build a practice when you're preventing something, to try and prevent something. And I also think to make those guarantees is just not ethical in terms of practice. So regarding the law of attraction, I want to help people become the very best they can be. So I'd like to focus on promoting optimal health, having them work in this area of wellness, this state of well-being, the state of always trying to not maintain their health status, right? They're not a machine where we can maintain something, but we want to try and help them optimize and always become better, better, and better. That's at least the intent. Now, in terms of glyphosate, glyphosate is the most used agricultural chemical. This came out in, it looks like, February of 2016. And why is it used? Why is it used so commonly? Based on some of the studies, you'll see, let's see if we can bring the pen up here again. You'll see that there's really only one study that was ever done that looks at, and at least a realistic assessment of long-term effects of Roundup, right? Ready corn and soy feed on mammals was the study by Seralini. And it examined the effects of this Roundup on rats that were fed food with Roundup for their entire lifespan, okay? And this was done in 2012, not too long ago. And what the study showed was increased risk in mammary tumors in females, as well as kidney and liver damage in males, and a shortened lifespan in both males and females. And the effects occurred both in response to Roundup and to GM foods, genetically modified foods, alone, right? And these effects began apparently after 4 months. Now, why is that significant? Because the industry dictated that only 3 months is sufficient. It's a sufficient time to test for toxicity in rodent studies. So, look, did they know? It's hard to say, right? Did they know, hey, let's keep these studies at just 3 months, because at 4 months, this is where things start to go bad, right? Who knows? But it certainly is suspicious, right? But if we look at where this product is sprayed, just look at the list of foods here on the bottom. Take a look. Wheat, barley, oats, canola, flax, peas, lentils, and beans. Everything is sprayed. So it's interesting to look at, but we see wheat there, right? So is the big issues with autoimmune issues and intestinal permeability and leaky gut and, destruction of the villi and celiac disease. Is it the gluten, or could it possibly be the glyphosate? And we know that glyphosate certainly inhibits and shuts down a lot of the proteases from breaking down the protein. So now you're left with, you know, wheat just left sitting in the stomach and in the intestines that can mount an immune response. So the mechanism that glyphosate affects our health is the shikimate pathway. And it was at one point, and still, thought that the glyphosate is safe for human consumption because we lack this pathway. But do we lack it? And you'll see that I put the microbiome there because bacteria have this pathway. And I'll explain in a second what this pathway is. But the mechanisms that glyphosate affects our health is the shikimate pathway, chelation, and the cytochrome P450 system, which involves liver detoxification. Chelation just means to pulling out of minerals. So knowing these things can assist us in being proactive. If we know what minerals are chelated, then we can certainly offset those depletions. If we know the cytochrome P450 system is being affected, then we know that there are several ways that we can support that with foods and with nutraceuticals as well. And when we understand the shikimate pathway and certain minerals that are involved and vitamins involved, it helps us look at a few things. It helps us understand many pathologies that people exhibit, and we'll go over what some of those are, involving the thyroid gland, involving mood disorders, involving focus, depression, addictions, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autism, migraine headaches. The list just goes on and on and on. So there is some good news because it looks like the tides are starting to change a little bit. This here was posted December of 2018, and you'll see that it says here a jury ordered the chemical giant Monsanto to pay $289 million to a school groundskeeper who got terminal cancer after using Roundup. And it says that the Superior Court jury deliberated for 2.5 days before finding Dwayne Johnson's non-Hodgkin lymphoma was at least partly due to using glyphosate. And you'll see down there at the bottom, it says Monsanto acted with malice, oppression, or fraud and should be punished for its conduct. That's what the judge had announced in court. So that's some pretty serious stuff. There was another big case that we'll talk about a little bit later that settled, and this $280 million you'll see is chump change compared to this more recent lawsuit. And there are many more coming, as you will see. So in 2000, Williams made a statement in one of his peer-reviewed papers saying that glyphosate is nearly non-toxic to humans. And the reason why he said it was non-toxic to humans was this EPSP synthase, this 5-EPSP synthase, which is involved with this shikimate pathway, which I'll show you in the next slide or two. And it's the rate-limiting step in synthesizing the aromatic amino acids, tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine in that shikimate pathway. In plants, the aromatic amino acids collectively represent up to 35% of the plant dry mass. So again, the shikimate pathway is found in all three biological domains of life: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Now, bacteria include Enterococcus, Firmicutes, Bifidobacteria, Lactobacilli, and other bacteria that are found in the human gut. Archaea are the most ancient life forms. These are one-celled organisms which thrive in extreme environments. And the eukaryocytes include algae, yeast, plants, fungi, all animals, including insects, crustaceans, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish, and all mammals. So when we look at the shikimate pathway, let me bring up my pen again. And you'll see that all the way here at the bottom, phenylalanine and tyrosine and tryptophan, those are the aromatic amino acids. But here is that EPSP synthase enzyme. And you'll see here comes the glyphosate coming in, this very, very toxic chemical that's in Roundup. And you'll see that the glyphosate chelates manganese. Mn is manganese. It means magic or magical in Greek. And manganese is a mineral that we'll talk about quite a bit. It's one that really doesn't get too much attention, but I think you'll think a little bit differently in just a few minutes when we get into a little bit more detail about the significance of this magical mineral here. So we have these aromatic amino acids, and I want to take another look in another slide, again showing, let's bring up the pen, we'll use blue again here. So here is phenylalanine, and that gets metabolized and converted to tyrosine. And what's significant about tyrosine, if you think about tyrosine with 4 iodines, gives us T4. That's thyroxine. And T4 we know gets converted into T3, triiodothyronine. We know that this conversion takes place primarily in the liver, and we know that it is selenium dependent, okay, because of the deiodinase enzymes that are required for these conversions. And we know that glyphosate also chelates selenium. So there's a major domino effect here. So the reason why I bring this up is to get you to think about the possibilities of look at all of the different types of thyroid imbalances that are taking place in the hypoactive thyroids. Can there be an association here to this glyphosate, not only in the chelation of minerals, but also with the aromatic amino acids? Also from tyrosine, we can also get melanin from that. Melanin deals with skin pigmentation, right? That's melanin, not to be confused with melatonin. Then tyrosine gets converted to L-DOPA. This is something that's found primarily in the midbrain. It's a portion of the brain stem if we go inferior to superior. In the bottom, we've got the medulla. You move a little bit higher up is the pons, and a little bit higher up is the midbrain, where we have a region called the substantia nigra. And when L-DOPA isn't being produced, then we start to see things like Parkinson's disease, where you have those Parkinsonian-like tremors. Then L-DOPA gets converted to dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. These are sometimes referred to as catecholamines. And when dopamine is dysregulated, then we start to get issues like mood disorders and depression, and dopamine is really involved with the reward system, right? And the norepinephrine, when norepinephrine's off balance, or noradrenaline, then we start to get things like panic attacks and anxiety issues. And when epinephrine seems to be off balance, we get things like anger management issues. Um, and also, when we're under stress, these things need support of methylation. We need methylation for norepinephrine and epinephrine to be produced. You need methylation for DNA synthesis and RNA synthesis. Neurotransmitter production needs methylation. Myelin production also requires methylation as well. And here's tryptophan, and from tryptophan we get serotonin. And something else we can get from tryptophan that people forget about, and that is B3, which is also known as niacin. In order to make that, it's really wild, right? You need B2 and you also need B6. Okay? But from tryptophan, yep, you can get niacin. Okay, so moving on again, here is that pathway once again, just showing also some of the nutrients that are needed here. You can see when you go from L-dopa to dopamine, there's B6, pyridoxal phosphate. Going from dopamine to norepinephrine, we need vitamin C. And then going from norepinephrine to epinephrine, there's SAMe, right? S-adenosyl methionine. This is why I said methylation is required for this. Biologically active molecules, including serotonin, melatonin, melanin, epinephrine, dopamine, thyroid hormones, folate, CoQ10, coenzyme Q10, vitamin K, and vitamin E, they depend on the shikimate pathway metabolites as precursors. So now we look at some of these. Let's get the pen on again. Vitamin K. When we think of vitamin K, we think of clotting, but vitamin K is also needed to help drive calcium that's in your blood vessels and drive that calcium into the bone. Right? We know vitamin D helps us absorb calcium into the blood vessels, but if you don't want blood vessels to calcify, because if they do, then you get high blood pressure, because blood vessels need to vasodilate and open up. But vitamin K is required to drive that calcium into the reservoir or bank that we call bone. When we look at CoQ10, the CoQ10, if you remember back, is involved with energy production. It takes place within the mitochondria of the cell, and the mitochondria is where the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle takes place, but it's also where the ETC or the electron transport chain takes place. And CoQ10 is needed by the mitochondria. So now you think, well, what parts of the body have the most mitochondria? Well, the parts of the body that have the most or that require the most energy. I think muscles, skeletal muscles. I think heart, cardiac muscle. I think the neural system, the brain. Okay? And then let's not forget B9, and B9 is very important along with B6 and B12 for methylation. So we will look at that in just a little bit. Vitamin E is a really important antioxidant. It's fat soluble. It's really needed to help recycle the fatty portion of cell membranes. A lot of people use vitamin E and incorporate it with omega-3 fish oils to prevent the lipid peroxidation that may take place with that. Glyphosate was patented as an antimicrobial, and it's been shown to disrupt the gut bacteria in animals. And when that happens, you get this overgrowth of bad bacteria by killing off the good bacteria, right? We want more of the good guys than the bad guys here. Glyphosate disrupts the balance of gut bacteria in poultry and increasing the ratio of the pathogenic bacteria to other commensal microbes. Salmonella and Clostridium are highly resistant to glyphosate, whereas Enterococcus, Bifidobacterium, and Lactobacillus, very susceptible. And this is important, folks. This is really important because this lactobacillus is really important because it has the ability of producing an inhibitory neurotransmitter called GABA. Okay, they use lactobacillus to help people with anxiety issues, to calm them down, because it has the ability of producing GABA. Okay, think of GABA. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter, and GABA. Think of glutamate as like the accelerator, and GABA is the brake. And you want glutamate to be more dominant in the morning hours, and then you want your GABA to be more dominant in the evening, so that in the morning when you rise, you're activated, your neural system is alert, and then towards the evening, your brain can shut down, can slow down, and that's what GABA does. So lactobacillus is extremely important. Okay, let's look at the next slide here. This slide is really here to just show you that the estimated use in million pounds, right? My God, look at corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton, vegetables and fruits, rice. You can see the color code on the right-hand side. So it goes all the way up. You can see rice, orchards and grapes, alfalfa. It's really in all sources. Even in cotton. That's important. I want to stress that because it's in clothing. And the skin, things can diffuse through the skin into circulation. So you can have glyphosates circulating if, there's a big movement now for organic clothing, right? And now you can understand why. Glyphosate is highly corrosive to the esophageal epidermal lining, right, with upper GI tract injury observed in 94% of the patients following glyphosate ingestion. Now, I look at the esophagus and I just say, okay, it's part of the GI tract. What type of tissue is it made up of? And it is epithelium, right? In fact, the entire GI tract from the mouth to the anus is epithelium. So there could be damage throughout the entire GI tract, and we know that there is because it can actually create an intestinal permeability or leaky gut as well. This was from 2012, long-term toxicity in Roundup herbicide and Roundup tolerant genetically modified maize. So if we look at this by Seralini, these were studies that were done in mice. And in the treated males, there was liver congestion and necrosis, 2.5 to 5.5 times higher, and marked and severe nephron damage. So the reason why this is significant is because when you look at the liver and you look at nephron damage, the nephron is where? Where do we have nephrons? Think about it. That's right. We have nephrons in the kidneys. It's part of the filtering process and part of the secretion and excretion and reabsorption of nutrients. So liver and kidneys are really important in terms of liver detox. So when we look here, let's bring out the pen again. Let me use red here this time. So I really want you to understand liver detoxification. Okay, and the process and how this all works. So toxins are coming in, right? We all know the liver's involved with detoxification. So we have endotoxins coming in, and we also have exotoxins. So the difference between endo are the toxins that are produced where? But inside the body, the end products of metabolism, bacterial endotoxins. The exotoxins are coming from the outside world. These are drugs, whether they are prescription or over-the-counter or recreational. Chemicals, and we're talking about agricultural chemicals like glyphosate. We're talking about, food additives. food colorings, a lot of the toxic dyes that are used. We have household chemicals and pollutants, contaminants, and microbiomes. So all of these different toxins are coming in. And when they come in to the cytochrome P450 system, or phase one of liver detox, the whole idea of this phase one is we're trying to take these lipid soluble toxins. Some of them are stored in fat cells, right? The reason why they're stored in fat is if it went to your neural system too quickly, it would kill us. So it stores it in fat. It stores it in fat, and little by little by little, it can release it for detoxification. We don't want it to come in too quickly. So fat cells are a storage site for toxins. So hopefully that helps us look at obesity in a different light as well. Because maybe people are more obese not because they enjoy junk food or they enjoy the wrong types of foods, but it's an indicator that perhaps they're more toxic and these toxins are being stored in fat cells. Okay, so we've got these fat-soluble toxins coming in. We need to break them down, and the focus is to make them more water-soluble so that eventually we can excrete them through the kidneys into urine or through bile and to eliminate through bowel movement. So phase two is responsible for making them much more water-soluble. Okay, but here's the deal here. What's really important is that as the toxins come in to phase one, between phase one and phase two, there are these intermediate metabolites that are produced. They create here these free radicals or reactive oxygen species. This is what damages your DNA. These are like bullets going off in the body. This is extremely damaging. You can see free radicals. We can see secondary tissue damage. So we want to make sure that we are properly equipped with the right antioxidants to handle the oxidants. And if you're not properly nourished here with the supporting nutrients for phase one, or we're not properly nourished with supporting nutrients for phase two, we have a problem. This is why they say, please don't start a detoxification without your doctor's supervision, right? I just say you want to make sure that they are properly equipped with these nutrients to limit the damaging effects of these free radicals. Now, we said that glyphosate damages this cytochrome P450 system. When this part of the liver is damaged, there's a lot of effects to that, negative effects. You can't make vitamin D. That's an issue. You can't make bile acids, which is needed to help for elimination and excretion. Detoxification, vitamin D, these are some major functions. Not only do glyphosates damage that cytochrome P450 system, but start looking at your nutritional intake forms, start looking at the medications that some of your clients are taking, and start looking at how many of those medications affect the cytochrome P450 system. A simple thing like Tylenol or aspirin is going to damage that cytochrome P450 system. Okay, so it's also really important. Let's see if I can just change the color of the pen here. Oh, pen color, give me a second. You can see that glutathione shows up here. We can see that glutathione shows up here, but so does glutamine, so does glycine. And glutamine and glycine and one more amino acid called cysteine, they come together and the body can create glutathione, the most important and powerful antioxidant to humans. We also want to make sure that we have good methylation that takes place. And we'll go over what that methylation is. Now, in the slide before with those rats, it said that there was liver damage and kidney damage. So if there's kidney issues, well, phase 1 can work, phase 2, but when it becomes water soluble, we want to make sure that we can properly eliminate through the kidneys. And this is where pH comes into play. And it's a good idea to assess pH of the urine, because for proper elimination of these toxins, having a urinary pH of somewhere around 7.2 is ideal for toxin elimination. If not, it makes another pass through phase 1 and phase 2 detox again. And remember, each time you go from phase 1 to phase 2, we are going to see these reactive oxygen species. And again, if you're not equipped with the proper antioxidants, you do so much more secondary tissue damage. All right, so we want to be properly equipped with powerful antioxidants. This is where the reactive approach, if we know that someone's liver is affected due to the glyphosate, good liver support, good liver detox is needed. And there's so many different nutraceutical companies out there that offer these liver and gallbladder support. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are many sulfur-containing foods, and garlic and onion and Jerusalem artichoke, very, very helpful. So other properties of glyphosate also negatively impact human health. This chelation of minerals, iron. When I think of iron, we should all be thinking of anemia, right? Also, with iron, we think of the electron transport chain, energy production, because there are these iron sulfur boxes that are involved with the electron transport chain. Cobalt, when I see cobalt, in there you see cobalt from cobalamin, B12. And again, interference with the cytochrome P450 system. But in terms of chelation of minerals, let's take a look here at this slide. Conventional corn that's not treated, organic corn, no chemicals involved to treat this. Look how much it weighs, 56 pounds. Look at the Roundup Ready. How much does the bushel weigh? Take a look. Where do you think the 2-pound difference comes from? 54 pounds for Roundup Ready, 56 for traditional. Where is it coming from? Look at the chelation. Look down below. Iron, copper, zinc, calcium, magnesium. Look at this. Cobalt, manganese, molybdenum, selenium, sulfur. But the crazy part about this is these things, we're talking about pounds. You know, like, look at a molecule of iron and copper. I mean, so this is tremendous. And plus the aromatic amino acids make up 35% of the dry mass. So this is some serious stuff, the chelation of these. And we can look and say, well, all right, with iron, you know, we start thinking about energy production. We look at Cu, we look at copper. Then we start thinking about antioxidant potential of that because of copper, zinc, SOD, copper, zinc, superoxide dismutase. That involves protection of the cell and the cytoplasm. And there's the zinc, copper, zinc, SOD. Zinc also has many immune properties, and we know calcium, my gosh, right? Calcium is involved with clotting. Calcium is involved with muscle contraction. It's involved with bone density, clotting. It's a cofactor in so many different enzymes. And we can go on, and we will. We'll talk about magnesium and cobalt, and especially Mn, manganese and selenium in the next few slides. So again, the cytochrome P450 has many roles. Bile acid production. If you're not producing bile acids, you're going to have a difficult time with elimination. Vitamin D activation, cholesterol production, estrogen synthesis, vitamin A metabolism, detoxification, and blood clotting regulation, all involve cytochrome P450 system. Okay, this is a real interesting slide. Disruption of mucosal folds and disarray of microvilli structure in the intestinal wall, along with exaggerated secretion of mucin throughout the alimentary canal. These features are highly reminiscent of celiac disease, right? It's not celiac, but it's reminiscent of it. That's what glyphosate is doing. It's destroying the microvilli structure. So how are people supposed to absorb their nutrients if the microvilli are damaged? Let's tie this in, because with celiacs, right, there is a high rate of anemia. So anemia has high prevalence. Anemia has a high prevalence among those with microvilli disease due to the deficiency in not just iron, but folate and cobalamin. And we'll talk about cobalamin and folate, that is B12 and B9, in relationship to methylation. We'll show you how that works in a second. Iron is also strongly chelated by glyphosate, an effect which shows up strongly in plant studies. Macrocytic anemia, which can be caused by either a vitamin B12 or a B9 deficiency, has been documented in my studies with glyphosate exposure. So this is a wonderful illustration that is taken, let's use blue here, taken from a book that I use to teach vitamins and minerals. The author is Groper. And this methylation cycle uses B6 over here. And let's make this a little better, B6. And then here's B12. And then here's B9. So, B6, 9, and 12 go together. We know that when there's deficiencies in B6, 9, and 12, homocysteine levels go up, right? And we know that homocysteine levels go up if people have MTHFR, meaning they have a problem with methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. ACE is the enzyme. And there could be two different SNPs, single nuclear polymorphisms. With MTHFR, there's the C6717, the A1298C. And we know we could be either heterozygous or homozygous with that. So basically what that means is that this enzyme is not working very efficiently, so we have difficulty in getting 5-MTHF. Okay. Now, let's start at the bottom right here. Let's start right here where homocysteine is. Now, I think of homocysteine as liquid sandpaper that's running through blood vessels. And I'd like for you to think of it the same way. Most people that have strokes or heart attacks, their homocysteines are through the roof. So it rips apart the tunica intima or the tunica interna, or the endothelial lining, which is nothing but simple squamous cells, simple squamous epithelium, which is the internal lining of a blood vessel. Okay, so that can easily get damaged with homocysteine levels that are high. So our bodies want to try and get rid of homocysteine, and it could do so in two different ways. It can go downward in this direction to cystathione that will eventually go to cysteine. Okay, and we know that cysteine, along with glutamine and glycine, produce what? I'll say it again. Cysteine, along with two other amino acids, glutamine and glycine, produce what powerful antioxidant? That would be glutathione. Okay? So that's one possibility. The second is homocysteine can come up in this direction up to methionine. It's a methyl donor. How does it make that conversion from homocysteine up to methionine? Well, it uses this right here, methylcobalamin, You see that methyl group attached to cobalamin? You see that? So that comes up this way and joins forces with homocysteine coming up. So homocysteine borrows that methyl group and it becomes methionine. So what happens to methylcobalamin? It loses its methyl group and becomes cobalamin without the methyl. But how does cobalamin come back in this direction here and become remethylated? Well, it takes that methyl group from 5-methyl-THF, right? Comes down like this, takes it, and cobalamin becomes remethylated, and we lose our methyl group here and just get tetrahydrofolate. Okay, so this cycle works all the time, over and over and over. Once you get methionine, methionine comes down to SAMe, or S-adenosyl methionine. This is a methyl donor. And then that becomes S-adenosyl homocysteine to homocysteine. And again, from homocysteine, you can move downward with the help of B6 to cysteine, or it comes up by joining force with methylcobalamin and comes up and becomes methionine again. This cycle happens over and over and over and over and over. If you're not methylating properly because of MTHFR mutations or because of B6, B9, or B12 deficiencies, methylation is not going to happen, which means DNA synthesis becomes impaired, RNA synthesis, myelin production, neurotransmitter production. These are people who also have difficulty in losing weight because if you can't methylate, if you look at L-carnitine, which is a fat metabolizer, is nothing more than trimethylysine. So these are people that's are trying to burn fat cells, and they're on the treadmill for hours at a time, and they can't get the needle to budge on the scale. Look at these methylation issues. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a pretty clear and strong understanding of the importance of these three B vitamins, B6, 9, and 12. Hopefully it gives you a little bit of an understanding as to homocysteine, right? It happens to be one of those inflammatory biomarkers. And it can go up with MTHFR mutations or simply being deficient in B6, 9, and 12. And you should also be familiar with many of the medications out there that deplete B6, 9, and 12 because many people are on them, whether it be metformin, whether it be antidepressants, whether it be the oral contraceptive, they all deplete many of these B vitamins. As a glycine mimetic, glyphosate plays a much larger role in neuronal damage due to excess glutamate activity through its chelation activity of manganese. In the glutamate-glutamine cycle, glutamine synthetase requires manganese. It's responsible for converting glutamate to glutamine. Right? Glutamate is super excitatory. If we don't want neurotoxicity, we have to convert it into glutamine. So in this way, glutamine synthetase protects the neuron from glutamate toxicity. So still talking about glutamate and manganese. So glutamate has been implicated as an excitatory neurotoxin in the brain, not only in autism, but also in association with Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, ALS, and MS. So following glutamate release into the synaptic cleft, right, between the presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic neuron, right, so following that glutamate release in the synaptic cleft, microglial cells in the brain, right, a microglial cell is nothing but a macrophage within the brain. It was a monocyte that became a macrophage. But in the brain, we call it a microglial cell. It's going to take up excess glutamate, and it's going to convert it to glutamine using the enzyme glutamine synthase. The conversion of glutamine for the transport stage from the microglia to the neuron renders that molecule inactive as a neurotransmitter and a neurotoxin. So here is a really nice picture showing an NMDA receptor. So we can see that glycine is involved, and glyphosate is a glycine mimetic. It mimics it. So the more glyphosate one has, the more overstimulation we get to this NMDA receptor, the N-methyl-D-aspartate receptor. Glutamate is known as an excitatory neurotransmitter because it too hits this receptor, it opens up, and you have sodium and calcium that rushes in, and things depolarize. But we have magnesium that has the ability of sitting in this channel, and it's a natural calcium channel blocker. But magnesium moves out of the way, and calcium and sodium rush in. Okay, and you get this overstimulation of neurons, and they can burn out this way. They die. You get apoptosis, cellular apoptosis. So the NMDA is a receptor in that glutamate neurotransmitter system. And it has some major important functions within the neural system in the brain. It's involved with immediate and long-term memory, right? People that just forget things, general cognitive processing, personality and range of emotion, problem solving and planning, people that have issues with that, their personal drive, taking initiative, decision making and judgment, all involves this. I mean, these are, when you start looking at this, you start thinking like, wow, I know a lot of people that make poor decisions. I know people not that are lazy, they just lack ambition, initiative, drive. And then people get stuck with problems and they can't solve it. They look around like, who can help me, right? So, okay, so NMDA, direct effects have been documented in mice studies using hippocampal slices exposed to Roundup. And look what happens. Neuronal cell death was reached within 30 minutes due to an influx of calcium activating that NMDA receptor. Excess calcium may cause poor neural development in fetal brains of mice, and it is also possible that glyphosate may bind more strongly in place of glycine due to the NMDA receptor, causing an increased influx, again, of calcium in the neuron. So in terms of reactive versus proactive, let's take a look. The actions of increased calcium influx during neurodevelopment of the fetus may lead to connectivity alterations or developmental derangements in the central neural system. And these have been documented on MRI studies of children with autism. Beecham and Seneff suggest that neuronal damage consistent with autism appears to occur during the early stages of fetal neurodevelopment caused by intermittent exposure to low doses of glycine mimetic, primarily glyphosate. So this suggests that timing is everything. Since fetal neurodevelopment is extremely sensitive, and disrupting that neurodevelopment at just the wrong time can have devastating, long-lasting effects. So we want to make sure that at the time of conception, when a woman is carrying a baby, please, eat properly and stay away from these processed foods and non-organic foods. When they're sprayed with this glyphosate, I think it's just very, very risky to the fetal neurodevelopment. When we look at manganese, you look at glutamate overexpression in the brain in association with autism, Alzheimer's disease, and other neurological diseases can be explained by manganese deficiency. Again, we said manganese SOD, or superoxide dismutase. It's involved in protecting the mitochondria from oxidative damage, and mitochondrial dysfunction are some key features with autism and Alzheimer's disease. Chondroitin sulfate synthesis depends on manganese. So these can lead to poor bone density or poor bone remodeling with osteoporosis and softening of the bone with osteomalacia. Lactobacillus depleted in autism depend critically on manganese for antioxidant protection. Lactobacillus probiotics can treat anxiety. We said that a little bit earlier, which is a comorbidity of autism and chronic fatigue syndrome. Reduced gut lactobacillus leads to the overgrowth of the pathogen Salmonella, which is resistant to glyphosate toxicity. And manganese plays a very important role there as well. Sperm motility depends on manganese. So this can explain why perhaps we see some increased risks of infertility and birth defects. And glyphosate, through its disruption of bile acid homeostasis, ironically promotes toxic accumulation of manganese in the brainstem, right, in the midbrain, leading to conditions such as Parkinson's disease and prion diseases. The consequences of manganese deficiency include increased oxidative damage to the mitochondria, poor bone development, and impaired cartilage synthesis. Manganese deficiency can also be involved with insulin secretion. It can impair it. And in rat studies, it also caused reduced glucose uptake in adipose tissue. So manganese deficiency can contribute to impaired glucose metabolism in both type 1 and type 2 diabetes, which are certainly a growing problem worldwide. So here's where the superoxide anion, we see that O2 in the beginning, that's your free radical, that can do oxidative damage. So we need SOD, and you have Mn, manganese SOD, which converts that superoxide into hydrogen peroxide, and then with the help of catalase and glutathione, it breaks that down to water and oxygen. Otherwise, you get cell damage. So manganese, you can see that glyphosate causes an imbalance in manganese distribution, where it could be transported by the vagus nerve into the brainstem because of the decreased disposal through the bile acids due to that cytochrome P450 system dysfunction, not producing bile acids. So it leads to the simultaneous toxicity and deficiency syndrome, right? So manganese can become concentrated in the brainstem, seen with Parkinson's disease, and at the same point in time, it can be deficient in other parts of the brain, like in the hippocampus, and we see increased seizure activity with ASD. We can see that within the midbrain, you have an accumulation of it, but then we can also have depletion of it in the hippocampus and also in the gut as well. Also keep in mind glyphosate contaminated soy-based infant formulas have also been shown to have increased risk of seizures in ASD. And it's not surprising since the USDA reported in 2011 that 91% of Roundup Ready soy was contaminated with alarmingly high residues of glyphosate. This is just a great picture showing the distribution of the vagus nerve, and it explains how you can end up with things from the gut, intestines, or stomach riding itself up that highway right into the brainstem. Ammonia is a highly diffusible gas. It readily crosses the blood-brain barrier, and its detoxification depends upon the conversion of glutamate to glutamine. We spoke about that before, which is catalyzed by glutamine synthesis, the enzyme in the microglia that relies on manganese as the cofactor. And ammonia is a well-established neurotoxin which accumulates when the urea cycle is unable to keep up with the ammonia released from the protein breakdown. So the ammonia accumulation can cause tremors, ataxia, right, that imbalanced gait and seizure activity, even coma and death. Excess ammonia due to the impaired ability to detoxify, excess nitrogen via the urea cycle leads to impaired memory, short attention span, sleeping issue disruptions, seizures. Look at these problems are so common in people today. They can't remember anything. They have short attention spans. And how many people are having poor sleep? And let's look at the urea cycle. The arginase, that final enzyme of the urea cycle, it's so dependent on manganese as a cofactor. So go back and think about phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, right? Phase 1 and 2 of liver detox, liver. Phase 3 is more involving the kidney for urine excretion. So the liver regulates the amount of manganese in the general vasculature circulation by incorporating any excess in bile acids, which gives the gut bacteria a repeated chance to take it up. However, the production of bile acid depends on what? The cytochrome P450 enzyme, and those are disrupted by glyphosate as well. Several members of the lactobacillus family are capable of producing the inhibitory neurotransmitter, which is gamma aminobutyric acid via the enzyme glutamate decarboxylase. And that's the main reason for the lactobacilli's ability to help improve symptoms of anxiety, the probiotics. Cancers and glyphosate. In 2015, the International Agency of Research on Cancer classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic in humans based on two carcinogenic activities of glyphosate, including induction of DNA damage and induction of oxidative stress. In vitro study showed glyphosate in parts per trillion can induce human breast cancer cell proliferation. Tetragenic effects have been demonstrated in human cell lines. Glyphosate-based herbicide produced tetragenic effects on vertebrates by impairing retinoic acid signaling. Glycine is found in numerous compounds of the body, including the master antioxidant glutathione, in which deficiencies have been linked with increased risk of cancer. So remember, glycine, glutamine, and cysteine make up glutathione. In 2018, a California groundskeeper won $289 million lawsuit against Monsanto after being diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a cancer that has been previously associated with glyphosate in literature. Low erythrocyte manganese SOD, which is cancer protective, has been found in non-Hodgkin lymphoma patients. But one interesting point to make here is that celiac disease is associated with an increased risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Magnesium, that's the second most abundant intracellular cation in the body. This is another one that's chelated. It's involved in over 300 enzyme reactions. It's important for bone mineralization, insulin production, hormone signaling, and calcium regulation. How is it involved with calcium regulation? Think back to the NMDA receptor that we just talked about a few minutes ago. Calcium is that plug, right? So if you're calcium deficient, calcium can rush in the NMDA receptor. As long as you have calcium in there, it's like a natural calcium channel blocker. And that's why magnesium is known as a relaxant, because when it is present in the NMDA receptor, calcium cannot influx in, right? And calcium rushing in is what is involved in initiating that neural excitability, as well as sodium for depolarization. Low magnesium levels result in neuromuscular excitability symptoms. So in here, we can see it associated with migraine headaches. We can see it with fibromyalgia as well. Deficiencies are very common among the general population. May express as fatigue, muscle weakness, muscle cramps, tremors, paresthesia, people that have hyperactive reflexes. So when you do a nutritional physical exam, having a reflex hammer, tapping over those tendons like the biceps tendon or patellar tendon and seeing if those things are hypersensitive is a pretty strong indicator. There are also some cardiovascular symptoms. This is why doing blood pressure as part of your anthropometrics is so important, because increased blood pressure can be related to magnesium issues. Also vasospasms, right? Because magnesium allows smooth muscle to relax. If smooth muscle can't relax, then blood pressure is going to build up as a result of those vessel spasms. Magnesium deficiency also affects the neural system, so headaches, irritability, restlessness, mental confusion, and seizures are also associated with magnesium deficiency. Our good friend iron, that's important for heme or hemoglobin within the blood cell. Hemoglobin and myoglobin carry oxygen. They carry nitric oxide. They carry CO2 as well. Peroxidases for thyroid hormone synthesis and antioxidants. Iron is needed for the electron transport chain. It's very, very important for detoxification enzymes. So when there is deficiencies, we can see it in microcytic anemia, fatigue, reduced thyroid function, an impaired immune system, impaired detoxification, and oxidative stress. There's also iron SOD, right? There's manganese SOD, there's copper zinc SOD, there's also iron SOD. Iron is very important. You can see within the mitochondria, there were these iron sulfur clusters in mitochondrial metabolism. Iron sulfur metabolism is essential for cellular function and is the key process in mitochondria. It says in this review, we focus on structure and assembly of the mitochondrial iron sulfur clusters and their roles. The take home message here is that iron is just extremely important to the mitochondria. Mitochondria produces energy in the form of ATP. This is why when there's iron deficiency, people feel tired. They feel tired because without iron, there's nothing to carry oxygen, and oxygen is required for ATP production. Cobalamin plays a major role in methylation pathway that I showed you a little bit earlier. And therefore, deficiency can create what? Hyperhomocysteinemia. That's when homocysteine levels rise due to a decrease in B6, B9, or cobalamin, B12. Other consequences of vitamin B12 deficiency include macrocytic anemia due to impaired hematopoiesis, fatigue, pallor, low blood leukocytes, low platelets, shortness of breath, and palpitations. Deficiency of cobalamin may lead to neurological symptoms such as poor coordination, numbness, and or pain in the extremities, loss of vibration touch, right? The taking a tuning fork and touching it to the toe or the medial malleolus or to the sternum, and the patient being able to determine that they can feel that vibration there. Also, B12 deficiencies, inability to produce the myelin sheath or demyelination. So B12 deficiencies start to look a whole lot like multiple sclerosis symptoms. So for B12, take a tuning fork, a 128 hertz tuning fork. You hold it by the stem, bang the other end of it, and then hold that vibrating stem to the toe or to the medial malleolus, and you ask the client if they feel anything. You don't say, can you feel this vibrating, or can you feel the vibration? Just say, close your eyes and tell me if you feel anything. And they should say, yeah, I feel vibration. If they don't, then we have to think that there's a methylation issue, B6, 9, and especially B12. Zinc is involved in a wide variety of functions, including gene expression, nutrient metabolism, very important for immune function, and antioxidant activity because of that copper zinc SOD. Zinc is as the most abundant trace metal in the brain, and a deficiency has been implicated in the buildup of amyloid beta plaques that are seen with Alzheimer's disease. So do the zinc tally test, right? Take a little liquid zinc, swish it around in the patient's mouth, and say, just shake your head yes if you can taste something. If there's no specific taste or other sensation that is noticed in the mouth for about 10 seconds, they're extremely deficient. Or they have a strong and unpleasant taste almost immediately. That's response number 4. There's no deficiency. So you want them to be able to taste something very, very quickly if they have good amounts of zinc. Okay? If they're deficient, it's going to take them. They'll probably have it in their mouth for 20, 30 seconds, swallow it. Then afterwards, maybe they'll taste that, funky, mineral, dry, kind of furry sensation on their tongue. Calcium has important functions in the human body, including bone mineralization, muscle contraction, blood clotting, nerve signal transmission, and it's a cofactor in many other enzyme reactions. With calcium deficiency, it can result in muscle contractions without proper relaxation, especially the hands and feet. And this is where Schwastik sign and Trousseau sign come into play with the nutritional physical exam and assessment for calcium. Trousseau sign is just put a blood pressure cuff around them. You start pumping that up, and then look what happens to the hand. You get like adduction of the thumb, flexion of the fingers and the wrist. That's called trisocine. That's hypocalcemia. And if you tap right near the masseter muscle, near the jaw, and you start to get contraction on half the side of the face with that tapping, again, hypocalcemia. That's called Schwastik's sign. Copper is extremely important. These are, again, all these minerals are all chelated. So once you know their function, you can kind of predict what the dysfunction is. So copper plays a major role in iron utilization. It's involved with collagen synthesis and the synthesis of neurotransmitters and synthesis of norepinephrine. And a copper deficiency may result in a secondary iron deficiency anemia. It's needed to mobilize iron from storage. Copper is needed for connective tissue production. So a lot of connective tissue disorders can show up with copper deficiency. Some bone disorders and even lack of muscle tone, pretty common with copper deficiency. When you think of selenium, you have to think of the thyroid. You have to think of that T4 to T3 conversion. Selenium is important for the deiodinase enzyme. We know that T4 to T3 conversion takes place in the liver. Selenium is also needed to support glutathione recycling. We know that because the cytochrome P450 system is damaged, we have difficulty in producing vitamin D. And vitamin D is a major issue, right? In a large population study in the US, a study found deficient levels of vitamin D in 83% of black women, 92% of their newborns, as well as 47% of white women and 66% of their newborns, despite the fact that 90% of the women were on a prenatal vitamin. Okay. Going a step further, lots of talk about vaccines these days and the MMR and measles. So measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines are contaminated with glyphosate. The gelatin and serum derived from the contaminated animal proteins are used as a stabilizer for vaccine culture, especially the collagen due to their substitution for glycine. In tests of 19 vaccines, all those with gelatin medium tested positive for glyphosate. So this should kind of create a little bit of curiosity. There was always a lot of debate and always a lot of conversation around links to the MMR vaccine and autism. Was it thimerosal? Was it mercury? Was it the adjuvants? What was it? Now perhaps there's another factor here that's been neglected, the glyphosate. There's some food for thought. So proactive approach, it's really important to be proactive here. There are several things we can do because, look, for a while they said, sorry, it doesn't cause cancer. This was a more recent article, looks like April of 2019. But then, look at this, a $2 billion lawsuit. This was settled here, a husband and wife team. They each got $1 billion. This was just, I found this on May 13th of 2019. Okay, so it looks like you got that $289 million suit. Now we got a $2 billion suit that just came to an end. And there are currently about 13,000 other cases. Look at all the food sources that have these. This is what kids are eating: Cheerios, they're having Ritz crackers, Oreos, Cheez-Its, Special K cereal. I mean, my gosh, it's horrific. So the proactive approach, let's try and minimize the exposure. Okay, let's eat foods that are organic, no pesticides, chemical free. Avoid living near the agricultural fields where synthetic harmful chemicals are sprayed. Avoid using them in your own homes. Consume clean drinking water. For the last 14 years, I've had a great system in my home that's a point of entry system that pulls out glyphosate. It's not a reverse osmosis system. I'm not a big fan of those. But when I went to Greece this was in 2004 for the 100-year anniversary for the Olympics. I noticed that the Olympic swimmers were not swimming in a chlorinated pool. They were swimming in a system that was called EcoSmart, ECOSMARTE, EcoSmart. I do not get any kickbacks for recommending that system. I'm just telling you that I've had it myself, personal use for my pool and for my home. I have two separate systems. Have been very, very happy. You can Google them, you can research them. So it's called EcoSmart with an E at the end of smart, and it's a copper ionization type of system. No chemicals in my pool. There's no chlorine and no chemicals, and I have a point of entry for my home. Avoid plastics. Implement protection against electromagnetic field exposure. Try and remove amalgam fillings. We have a great dentist in my area, holistic dentist, and this is what she does. She removes the heavy metals from the body. Consider using air filters in your home. Consume organic, grass-fed, non-GMO foods. Sugar-free, because sugarcane is also heavily sprayed with glyphosate. Try and include more colorful foods that tend to be more anti-inflammatory. Avoid using the microwave. Use healthy cookware. Understand your biochemical individuality. Have good antioxidants in your food supply. Make sure you can remove the toxins by having healthy bowel movements every day. Support sulfate pathways, dietary sulfur like from garlic and onions. Boost your glutathione production. Consider using supplemental NAC, the N-acetylcysteine, because between glutamine, glycine, and cysteine, cysteine is the weak link dietarily. So a little bit of that supplemental cysteine is a smart thing. From a lifestyle approach, chiropractic care to boost your body's ability to make its own serum thiol levels. Serum thiol is naturally produced. It's like glutathione. And studies were done with long-term chiropractic patients for over 2 years, had higher serum thiol levels. They looked at their telomere length. The longer the telomere, the longer your cells live. The longer your cells live, the longer the tissues, organ, system, and organism lives. So consider if you, in addition to nutritional care, chiropractic is a very essential part to natural antioxidant boosting. Liver support, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There are many companies that have great nutraceutical products. Again, they're supplemental. It's not a substitute. Food is primary, but depending on where you are, if you're in crisis care intervention, you need to get people on certain supplements to help with liver support. So reduced levels of serum thiol levels in patients with diagnosis of active disease. Everyone that had an active disease had decreased thiol levels. And here are some studies that were done on chiropractic patients that were under care for 2 years or more. They had much higher levels of naturally produced antioxidants than those who were not receiving care.